Tychus approves of this chisel rack. Hey y'all, I'm James Wright, and welcome to my shop. A while ago I made this chisel rack, and I made it to mount onto my old bench. Well, now I have this tool wall that I'm building, and I want to be able to put the chisel rack on this wall, but I still want to be able to maintain the ability to pull the chisel rack out and take it where I want to and put it back in. And so I wanted to make a hanger that I can then put on to the French cleat wall and hang the whole thing up like that. So today we're going to be making the holder for the chisel rack. If you want to see the video on the chisel rack, I'll leave a link to that down below. But let's dive in, take a look. This whole project is made from scraps that I had lying around. Some of them were cut-offs from making all of the French cleats. Some of them were from other odds and ends projects, and a couple of the pieces actually I pulled out of furniture that I salvaged. But it's all white oak, and that's what matters to me. So first I'm going to do is I'm going to start by taking this chunk of French cleat and cutting those off. Those will be glued and screwed to the backs of the verticals. So I need to cut those off to be the length of the width of the verticals. So they will be as long as the verticals are wide. And the verticals will then be what hangs on the French cleat. So once we cut those off, we can then go on to making the horizontal beam. This is what connects the two verticals together. It'll span between the two so they don't separate or slide apart, so that the rack is held firmly in place. And this was covered with an old varnish finish, and I wanted to clean that off. So you take it down to bare oak, plane, and a scraper. Did a quick job of that. Now I want to put this horizontal beam onto the two little verticals with a half lap joint, and I'm going to put it right there in the center. So I need to mark out exactly where it crosses at the beam and the vertical. Once I've made those marks, then I can draw them out. I'm also going to be putting the marks on the horizontal beam as well, where they cross the vertical. Here you can see I'm cutting down halfway into it. And then to mark out where to stop the cut, where to take out the half lap mount, I'm going to be using the marking gauge. So I'll put the marking gauge on one side, flip it over, and then put it back in and see if my two lines match up. If they do, that lets me know I'm on the center of the board and I have the correct measurement on it. So I can mark out exactly where the center is so I know what material to cut out. Next I can chalk it up in the vise and cut down. Here you can see the mirror effect on the saw. And it was slightly out of square, but not by a huge amount. Depends on how you twist it. But once I get the cut down into the material, then I can stand the vise up and cut the cheek of the half lap. And I'll just cut down, follow a line. I don't put any kerf or anything on there, just work at it slowly. It's a skill that can be developed with a good amount of practice on it. Now that I've cut out the half lap on the horizontal beam, I need to cut out the half lap on the two verticals. I'm just going to start the cut, just like that, and then slice down to the stop mark that I made with the marking gauge. And make sure that I go all the way across. Now with this one, I can't cut down from the end like I did on the horizontal beam, so I need to remove everything in between those two cuts with a chisel. And this part is a lot of fun. I don't know why, but I really find this very enjoyable. I'm just taking out a little bit at a time, not a huge amount, just a eighth no, an eighth would be probably too much. I don't think I'd do more than a 16th at any given time. And then come back and clean it all up with a router plane. And make sure that bottom is nice and smooth and clean so I have a good glue joint against the horizontal beam. Once that's been done, I can test the fit, and you can see how the horizontal beam will then connect to the two verticals. And now I can test it on the wall. With that in place, a quick clamp up and gluing, I can set it aside and then start working on the diagonal support. Basically what I want to do is I want to tip the chisel rack away from the wall a little bit so they're easier to get to, especially with it housing right underneath the planes. So I'm going to create these wedges that are about 2 inches wide, 3/4 inch at the top and going down to 0 at the bottom. You can see how I trace it out, and then I can cut on that line and I'll end up with 2 wedges. So to cut on that line, I just chalk it up in the vise so that the line is straight up and down, and then very carefully follow the line down on my side of the board because I can see that. And then I'll turn the board around and I'll cut all the way down on the other side of the board. until I can cut all the way across it. You can see I turned it around until I make that breakout. Now I have one wedge cut off, and the other one then I can just stand up in the vise and cut it off. So I have two identical wedges that have the same angle on both of them, and I can use those then to bend this out away from the wall a bit. So I'm just going to glue those in place, clamp them up, and let them set, because eventually I'm putting a screw through these holding blocks. I made these when I made the rack, so I can just put those in place and mark the hole locations with an awl, pre-drill out the awl, pre-drill out where the awl marked, and then connect it. A couple screws, and the screws go through the wedge into the main vertical, so those hold it in place as well as the glue. And I have a fairly tight joint there, and I really like how this came out. Just kind of it's a simple task that I didn't quite know how I was going to do it when I started in on it, but working through the problem, I eventually came up with what I wanted. And then of course it is my project, so I'm going to be doing boiled linseed oil and paste wax finish. If you've never worked with boiled linseed oil, it is a joy to work with, especially with white oak. It really brings out the color. And then I can put a paste wax on there. I have a video on making the boiled linseed oil, the paste wax, and how I do this. So if you want to see that, you can look that up. I might have links to that down below. But now it's all on. I can set it in place and then slide the chisel rack down in, and it's ready to work. And I am really enjoying how this came out. It was a lot simpler than I expected, and I'm going to have a lot of fun using it for years to come. So there you have it. I now have chisels on my wall. I have a few more tool holders to make, but I'm really happy with how this came out. Not only can I move the rack around other places and I can reorganize it, it's very functional and very, very close. So at any time I can turn around, I can grab a chisel, and I can keep working. So I hope you liked this video. It was a very simple and fairly quick one to make. And I kind of like the way it just hangs on with the French cleats here. I do want to say thank you to the patrons on Patreon. You guys are the reason why I can keep making videos like this. If you'd like to help out with Patreon or find out more information about that, you can do so right down there. And also, if you'd like to subscribe or see some behind the scenes footage, you can do that as well. And until next time, have a wonderful day.